Hi, I'm Pete Wagner. I've been in paleobiology since 2007, and what I'm going to talk about is less what I do and more why I do it. In particular, I'm going to tell you why the fact that I have long fingers makes Cambrian molluscs fairly interesting. Now, fingers are a good example of integrated anatomical characters. That is, they are linked by development, genetics, or function, so that they typically change together evolutionarily. Now, they can change independently. Our thumbs are much different from the rest of our fingers, but typically they change together. A primate species with long thumbs typically is going to have long fingers throughout its entire hand. Now, this is something that's studied heavily by developmental biologists. Why would a paleontologist care? Well, it turns out that integration makes some interesting predictions about what we should see in the fossil record. Let's take two hypothetical sets of fingers, a pair of fingers that evolve independently and a pair of fingers that are integrated. 0 is short and 1 is long. We start off with two short fingers. Under the independent model, we have a change and one finger changes. A second change, and we have two long fingers. Integration is predicting something very different. Basically, most of the changes are going to affect both fingers. So what we'll typically see is both fingers change at the same time. Changes affecting only one of them are going to be rare and tend to happen later in clade history. So if we see all three of these combinations, we expect them to happen in a different order under integration and under independent change. Now, one thing I want to point out here is that's what we expect to happen over time. The fossil record does not always accurately show what happened over time. However, if we restrict ourselves to looking at those anatomical characters for which we see only 3 of the 4 possible combinations, we're very non-randomly selecting amongst the characters that evolve fairly slowly relative to the rate at which we sample the taxa. And what you can show in simulations is you expect to get the right order about 90% of the time. So what do we really see? Here are echinoderms, starfish and companies, and vertebrates ourselves, good candidates for possible integration because you have complex skeletons. These are based on deviations from rather complex Monte Carlo tests. The important thing to know is negative numbers fit the expectations of integration. Positive numbers means you're actually matching the fossil record a little better than you expect from independent change. Now, what's important here is not so much just how far into the negatives you're getting, because you really can only get, if you're expecting 9%, you can't really have too far into the positive for the independent change. It's the numbers. Basically, 70% plus are showing signs of excess integration. We would expect this to be 50-50. These are based on hundreds of studies. This is a big deviation. Moreover, basically about 1/3 of them are showing deviations at the level that we would expect only 1 in 20 to show. So in other words, for both echinoderms and vertebrates, we have a lot of evidence that there is a lot of integration amongst our anatomical characters. Now that's interesting. How does this get us to the Cambrian? Well, one group for which we have a good Cambrian record are the arthropods, especially because of trilobites. And people have actually suggested for other reasons that integration might be lower amongst Cambrian trilobites than later trilobites. If that's the case, and that's what these tests are actually picking up, then we should see a difference. Now, arthropods don't show the pattern as well as the other two groups, but what happens is when we break out the Cambrian, that's pretty much symmetrically distributed about the expectation. In other words, that's matching what you'd expect from independence. It's the post-Cambrian ones that are showing the deviations consistent with increased integration. That's kind of cool. And that, of course, leads to the next question. Is it just the Cambrian trilobites or something about the Cambrian in general? Well, we need groups with good fossil records. Mollusks and brachiopods, if you're into those things, would be good cases to use for that. And if we look at what happens in studies that we have, they actually show the signs of integration as well. The problem is it's all post-Cambrian data. And that basically essentially wraps up my simple syllogism here. What we really need is information about what's happening with these things. Now, you might be disappointed. You might be thinking me I was going to show you some data with Cambrians, and I would point out that my promise was to show you why it would be interesting to collect the data. I've actually begun to do so, but fairly preliminary studies, and I don't do brachiopods, which are the other things you'd really need. But, and there are also some other interesting implications of this as well. People are, in general, interested in modeling morphologic evolution. Generally, this is done under the ideas that these things are changing independently, but I think we have good reason to suspect that actually that's not the case, and that integration is something we really need to consider. And it actually is it has even implications for ideas we have of what characters are adaptive and which ones are just following along for the ride. And at that note, it's been about 5 minutes, so if anyone has any questions, I am happy to take them. Question? Jonathan? I have not collected the data for plants because I'm mostly interested in animals. The studies I was looking at were generally focused at species level. Most of the plant studies that have been done have been at higher taxonomic levels. And there's not necessarily a reason why you'd expect to see a difference. It's just for the reasons I was collecting the data, I was focused on the species. So that's the only reason why I haven't looked at plants. But actually it'd be really cool because integration systems could be completely different. Yeah. One more? Can I do one more? What else makes, okay, the question is, what else makes Cambrian molluscs interesting, seeing I said there are more? Look at that thing. That's a snail with a howitzer on it in the middle. That's cool. You get an incredibly wide variety of shell forms, the likes of which we have never seen since in the Cambrian. This is very common in Cambrian taxa. So there's a sort of inherent interest in them for that reasons. And, of course, everybody likes their taxonomic group for whatever particular reasons turns you on. No accounting for taste.